right, my English teacher friends, Christian Kuhn coming at you again with another writing workshop video, affectionately known as the Bob Ross of composition. Up my sleeve, I got something clever and fun. We are going to take a look at the story, the classic children's story, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, as a vehicle to teach line of reasoning. And that, my friends, is the big kicker, right? Good thinking equals good writing. And all we're going to do in this writing workshop video is talk about how to capture students' brilliant thoughts on paper. For whatever the reason, it's difficult for some students, especially our struggling and emerging writers, to get their good, brilliant thoughts down on paper cogently. So we can use If You Give a Mouse a Cookie as kind of a vehicle or a launching pad to get everything nice and cogent on paper. So as I already alluded to, I'm going to focus on kind of a silly question. It's going to be a synthesis paper, but it's going to you'll see that you can use this across the expository modes. So the prompt is this: does SpongeBob SquarePants have any educational value for its intended age demographic? So I ran this with on-level sophomores, and it was very high engagement and they loved it. So what I did was we cobbled together a source packet. We had 7 sources for them that kind of said yay, nay, and some that qualified. And then part of their homework assignment was to watch 2 episodes of SpongeBob. How fun is that? They get to watch SpongeBob for homework. So what I'll do in this is run you through how we would construct the body paragraph syllogistically, right? Because If You Give a Mouse a Cookie is a syllogism at face value, and I'll show you how you can arrange all those pieces to really simplify what can be kind of a sophisticated heuristic in very user-friendly terms. So first, let's talk about what a syllogism is. It's rooted in the Aristotelian tradition, comes from Aristotle. He ran a school called the Lyceum, and the town boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling, and they'd often throw out these big, pithy, juicy questions like, what is justice? Which is the central question of Plato's Republic, the seminal text, Plato's Republic. And the philosophers and the scholars would step to the proverbial mic and they would drop their definition of what justice is. And Aristotle, much like us composition teachers, said, why is it that some of my students excel at this, some are just kind of meh, and some tank bomb it? Right? And we ask the same with composition, like is thinking on paper a congenital and innate disposition? Some kids have it, some don't. No, we got to teach them how to think cogently on paper. So he had a eureka moment one day and he said, aha, I got it. My really gifted orators have like a mathematical computative precision to the manner in which they argue. And he called it the syllogistic method. And all it is like a math formula. First premise, second premise, conclusion. So if I were to say to you, first premise, arsenic is deadly, you would say, yes, Christian, that is true. But then if I were to follow it up with the second premise that said, my dog ate arsenic, you would naturally conclude, uh-oh, Christian, that's not going to bode well for your dog. Your dog is probably going to die. That is an example of a syllogism. And Aristotle, for line of reasoning, used the term cogency. And I'll interchange cogency with line of reasoning in the rest of my presentation. But how do we take that syllogistic method and turn it into a heuristic for the purposes of performing synthesis? Right? And you can also do this for all the other expository modes as well. I have a ton of stuff in my YouTube video. Literally every single writing workshop video highlights the syllogistic method. It's the only heuristic my students use for their body paragraphs. So whether that be rhetorical analysis, lit analysis, synthesis, argument, persuasion, research, they always go syllogistically. But for synthesis, it looks like this. The first premise is going to be an argument containing a why reason. So I'll make a video for the whole SpongeBob paper down the road, but up top in the thesis, all you do is answer the essential question. So you say yes, no, or you qualify. So SpongeBob does have educational merit, it does not have educational merit, or you qualify it, right? And that's it. So in the body paragraphs, especially the first body paragraph, you want to get into your why reason. Why are you saying yes? Why are you saying no? Why are you qualifying? And that's going to be a 3-sentence move, right? College Board for FRQ1 for AP Lang says repeatedly, keep your argument central. So we want a 3-sentence transition in that opening body paragraph to keep the centrality of the argument. The second premise is going to take the shape of textual support, and this is where the student is going to teeter-totter balance the quoting and the paraphrasing. You don't want to do one far more at the expense of the other. And then the kicker here is that syllogistic body paragraphs have conclusions. And this is something like if we go and look at College Board sample papers, oftentimes students don't conclude their logic. They don't conclude their line of reasoning within the body paragraph. So we have to keep in mind that body paragraphs need conclusions. This takes the form of textual analysis. And we're going to talk in terms of this, keeping the promise of the first premise, right? Especially when we draw upon the analogy of if you give a mouse a cookie, keep the promise of the first premise. So let's break this down a little bit more. The first three sentences are going to comprise the why reason. You got to keep the quotes and the paraphrases connected to that why reason. Keep the promise of the first premise. And then a syllogistic body paragraph, no matter the expository mode, you're shooting for 10 to 12 sentences. So again, 3-sentence why reason. And typically students will quote and or paraphrase about 3 times within the body paragraph, and you're shooting for 10 to 12 sentences. Those little itty bitty 4 or 5 sentence bagger paragraphs that students often write, just don't hack it. There's not enough support and analysis in there. All right, so let's move on. Line of reasoning. Keeping the promise of the first premise, right? We have a mouse. We promised that mouse a cookie. Let's see how we can use that classic children's story as a vehicle to keep our line of reasoning intact. So this is my the beginning of my body paragraph. And I've delineated where the first premise begins and the second premise begins. And just to recapture that, the first premise is going to be a why reason. So look at what happens here. Let me spell out the reasons why watching SpongeBob is in some cases good. First, teaching young kids about the habits of establishing a strong work ethic is unquestionably something we want all of our youth to know. Second, SpongeBob clearly illustrates for children how to effectively establish interpersonal relationships. So let me break this down. I often refer to my writing strategies as heuristics. Templates tend to be more paint by number. Teachers equip students with sentence stems, etc. And I really don't do that all that much. But if I'm going to teach this at like on level first year, on level sophomores, I will give them the following to say, just as a training wheel, just as a scaffold. If the student says reason why in the first premise, it stands to reason that they're going to articulate a reason why. And that's what the student did here. He said, let me spell out the reasons why. And then he did this enumerated approach where he said first and second. So I laid down 2 cookies there. 1 cookie for the first reason, which is the idea that SpongeBob teaches strong work ethic. And then I laid down a second set of cookies for the second reason, which is that SpongeBob teaches interpersonal relationships. So sometimes students will multitask in synthesis, even in literary analysis and rhetorical analysis. They'll multitask rhetorical terms, devices, techniques, or literary terms, devices, techniques. So we have to go get quotes and or paraphrases for the first and the second. And to illustrate this and kind of conceptually break it down, the story progresses. Like if you give a mouse a cookie, he wants a glass of milk, he wants a straw, he wants a napkin, right? So you follow that syllogistic pattern. So we have two promises that we made there, right? Work ethic and interpersonal relationships. Since we said work ethic first, our first quotes and or paraphrases should be about work ethic. Fourth sentence begins the second premise, and you immediately get into your sources. So the students can either talk about episodes that they watched or draw from the articles that we read. So that quote is going to be the glass of milk. And it has to be about work ethic in order for this to keep and sustain a cogent line of reasoning. So let's see where it goes. We see these ideas at play in the episode when the Krusty Krab is forced to shut its doors due to lack of sales because the seas have become overpolluted. SpongeBob does not rest on his laurels and say, ho hum, poor is me, but instead he immediately becomes resourceful and demonstrates his great work ethic, right? So we're paraphrasing an episode here. So I would award that kid the milk, the glass of milk for the first cookie. We're keeping the line of reasoning. That's germane, right? We're keeping the promise of the first premise. First, he appoints himself as Czar of the Sea and gathers his friends to undertake a massive cleanup operation. Second, he does this for free under humble disguises. All right, so we got to move on. We can't paraphrase on and on and on and on. We have to work in other sources, right? So look at where it goes next. Hank Ellington, a Baptist minister for 30 years, attests that the program mirrors the teachings of fundamental Christianity, such as the traits of humility, grace, and compassion. So I put a straw there, right? Because if you give a mouse a cookie, you give him a glass of milk, and then you give him a straw. Do you see how that aligns to the second promise up top, right? Where we're talking about interpersonal relationships and work ethic tied together. So look where this goes. Every parent on the face of the earth wants to, and then I continue on to the next slide here, foster these attributes in their kids. Ellington went on to explain that kids do a lot of monkey see, monkey do. And he is right. Young children often mimic and mirror their environments. SpongeBob, therefore, is perfectly okay for kids to watch, especially if we want to teach them how to become better people and citizens. Vicky Dover concurs in that she sees a certain moral decay in our country over the past few decades. She sees SpongeBob as being the type of program to address the secularism and selfish me first mentality that has become so pervasive in our society. Well, I put a napkin there. Remember, we were talking about interpersonal relationships, right? Developing character, developing work ethic, developing good kids. So that all aligns there. We're going perfectly syllogistically here. All right. One thing I'll talk about just as an aside, you'll notice that the quotes are silky smooth. One aspect of my heuristic is called the 5-word rule. If a kid places a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote and keeps the quote relatively small, they may need to bracket. It should sound conversational. So out of the quote, you got to analyze it. Further, Dover and others view the program to be a modern day Mr. Rogers or even Sesame Street. So now we're at the conclusion of the body paragraph. You got to keep it all linked to the prompt, the thesis, and the promise of the first premise. It goes full circle. Mouse goes and asks for a whole other cookie when he's done, right? Doesn't eat just one. As you can see, SpongeBob is teaching us the real pedagogy that all kids need. The concepts of decency, friendship, and the betterment of mankind. While he's certainly an unorthodox character, he's nonetheless the type of person parents aspire for their children to become. And that, my friends, is a whole syllogism. That stayed super cogent. The line of reasoning is 100% intact there, right? And you can see it follows the logical progression of if you give a mouse a cookie. So the way that if you give a mouse a cookie is written is exactly how a syllogistic body paragraph proceeds, right? It's an if this, then this equation, deductive reasoning all the way through. So that might be a little confusing So let's see it one more time. I'll give you an example that does not work. So the line of reasoning breaks. So you can see here, this student is going to do the exact same thing. They're using my reason why scaffold or training wheel. But you're going to see that the quotes aren't germane to the cookies, right? So I used a graphic of a monkey wrench here and the mouse saying, uh-oh, because they broke the line of reasoning, right? The line of reasoning is keeping the promise of the first premise. So let's see what this student lays down. There are several reasons as to why parents should pull the plug on SpongeBob. First, given the intended age demographics, the show offers zero pedagogical value unless you're looking to instill the qualities of being rude and annoying. Study after study makes clear one simple fact. Young children learn nothing constructive from this program. So they did the enumerated approach as well. So I laid down 2 cookies here, one for the first, one for the second. So the idea that if you watch this show, you're just going to become rude and annoying. That's all that's being taught there. And that studies, you made a promise that you're going to focus on studies that all this does is to teach kids nonsensical things, nothing pedagogical whatsoever. So we have to go in order, just like we did before. A 4th sentence begins the second premise, and we should be talking about rude and annoying. Our quotes need to show how kids become rude and annoying. But look where it goes. In a recent study conducted by Johns Hopkins University and Mark Wilcox, they reported that the only takeaways from watching SpongeBob is the assurance that your child will become overstimulated, agitated, and negatively reinforced after watching the show for an hour. Participants in the case study saw their heart rates accelerate and their eye movements shift at an alarming rate. Pam Shriver indicated, based on her own studies, that this is a surefire way to elicit ADHD in your child while erasing all of your positive child rearing. We broke the promise of the first premise because we're talking about if you watch SpongeBob, there's chances that you could develop ADHD or ADD. And that's not what we promised. We were looking at behavior. Our promise was to focus specifically on rude and annoying behavior, not ADD, not ADHD, not heart rate acceleration or anything of that nature. So look where it goes from here, right? And I put the graphic of the trap. This is one of the traps that students fall into when they write. They get totally waylaid from the promise of the first premise and end up breaking their line of reasoning. One episode that illustrates these points nicely is Season 2, Episode 10. Shriver notes that within a 5-minute span, there are 348 attentional blinks, 20 times the rate of ADHD values. But this is only half of it. In this episode, SpongeBob and his friends are fiending for cigarettes and actually scheme up ways to secure a pack. Let me ask you, how is this age appropriate and what kind of pedagogy is this? Further, Patrick, because he harbors a resentment towards SpongeBob, finds himself inflicting a massive wedgie on his friend. So we're at the conclusion part of the syllogism, and you can see here that we really deviated hard from the promise of the first premise. The bulk of the support in the analysis focuses on ADHD and overstimulation. And we never promised that in the first premise, right? So it's like you promise the mouse the cookie and then you don't deliver, right? It's got to go in order. Cookie, glass of milk, straw, napkin. Everything's got to be in unison and all the sources need to be talking to each other. And this just doesn't do it. But you can see the writing's good. This kid knows how to write. It's just the logic is all jumbled. So let's see how they finish this off, because sometimes in the conclusions, kids get back on track or they just completely derail. I don't know about you, but I do not know many parents who are encouraging this type of behavior in their households. The bottom line is that parents need to parent and ensure that they are not being duped by an irresponsible TV babysitter. SpongeBob is not age appropriate no matter how you slice it. So again, the writing's good. Like this kid's got chops, especially for an on-level sophomore. They're a very good writer. but it's very discursive and kind of scat. I call it scat writing, scatological writing in terms of the logical progression. They need to tighten that up. So if you give a mouse a cookie is a very nice way to really elucidate for kids the steps that are needed to sustain a cogent line of reasoning from top to bottom in the body paragraphs. So that's a quick little demonstration. That's it from me. If you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to give me an email at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com and I'll respond to you as quick as possible. Also note that I'm a lead teacher for the National Writing Project, and I'm also a lead contributor for NCTE, and I present with them quite often. NWP and I offer year-long PD offerings. And if you want more information on any of our comings and goings, visit my webpage at teachinghowtowrite.com. There's an upper tab that says My NWP Courses. Click on that, and you'll have a drop-down menu of not only my courses, but all the other lead teachers at NWP. Some are for free, some are for a nominal fee. All of them give you PD hours if your state or school districts require that. So hope that helps you. Happy teaching, happy writing, be well. Hope you can use this in your classroom and that your kids find it to be riveting. Take care.